third chapter that we're going to cover in History 108 has a study guide called Liberalism and Lincoln. So what we're going to do in this series of videos is break up a look at Lincoln, slavery, and the Civil War into a series of smaller mini lectures, and all together they'll cover the topic of Lincoln, slavery, and the Civil War. So today we're going to focus on the position of the founders, those who created the United States initially, and then a group who came along later called the Abolitionists. Now, our first form of government was called the Articles of Confederation, and it kind of evolved from the Continental Congress that led the country through the Revolutionary War. Now, after the war, the government then was called the Articles of Confederation. There wasn't a president. We just had this one assembly that would meet, and then each state had one vote. One of the major decisions made during the Articles of Confederation took place in 1787. It was called the Northwest Ordinance. So, after the Revolutionary War, the United States acquired territory on the west side of the Ohio River, and then the Great Lakes region, and that would become, of course, states like Wisconsin and Ohio and Illinois and Indiana. And so one of the decisions that the government had to make under the Articles of Confederation is what would happen out in that territory. Would original 13 states just extend and become larger? No, what they decided is new states would be made out of that new territory. Now, one of the stipulations of the Northwest Ordinance was this: Now, this was a momentous decision, and I think it indicates a couple of things. One would be that the founders didn't think slavery was going to be around forever, that hopefully one day we would get rid of it. And the other precedent it establishes is maybe even more important, and here it is. The federal government has the authority to contain the spread of slavery. Because they just did it. And by doing that, they established a precedent. So none of the new states that would be created out of this Northwest territory would be allowed to have slavery. And this is an amazing precedent which is set. The federal government has the power to contain the spread of slavery. Later on, in the middle of the 19th century, Lincoln and the Republicans will bring this up again, and they're going to argue that principle needs to be reintroduced, and that will become a major plank of their Republican Party. Now, one other thing that the founders do, and we'll skip ahead here, to 1789. So our second form of government is the Constitution that we use today. So in 1789, the Constitution stipulated slave trade would end in 20 years. Not slavery, but the trade. In other words, in 20 years, it would be illegal to go outside of the United States to a place like Africa and capture Africans and bring them and require them to serve as slaves in the United States. That would end. This institution of slavery would still be around, but the number of slaves would increase just by the natural reproduction of slaves in the United States. So again, I think this shows that the founders didn't think that slavery would be around forever, and they hoped that it would one day disappear. So there's a phrase that we like to use to refer to what most of the founders, not all, but most of the founders thought about slavery, and here it is. Slavery was a necessary evil. One day it would have to be abolished. And Jefferson put it this way: having slavery is like having a wolf by the ears. You don't really like to have a wolf by the ears, but you don't really want to let the wolf go. And what they were afraid of is if you got rid of slavery, there would be so much antagonism on the part of the former slaves towards those who had enslaved them that you'd have a race war. So what the founders did, I think, is indicate that one day slavery would have to be abolished. They couldn't do it at this time, and so they put the issue on the back burner. That's the founders. Now, here's the next group. By about 1830, you have abolitionists. They're going to take a different view. They're going to argue slavery is a moral issue. It's a sin. It must be immediately abolished. And this is going to be viewed as a rather radical argument. And what many of the abolitionists believed in the 19th century is that the United States had the opportunity to become kind of the ideal, perfect society. You had to get rid of drunkenness, you had to get rid of prostitution, and you had to get rid of the big sin, which was slavery. And it had to be done immediately because it was a moral issue and it was a sin. So this is a much more radical position than the one taken by the founders, and it's going to draw a reaction and a Southern defense of the institution of slavery, which we'll talk about next.